Persona 5 is a game about stylish thieves in the night stealing corrupt desires of criminals and making them repent. It's a social sim game where you play as a high school student with a double life, juggling various tasks, acquaintances, social cred to maximize your stats. It's a game where your team walks into a trap they did not know existed and have to deftly navigate out of it. It is a game where you kill God and give the Prime Minister a lobotomy. Persona 5 is also a game without introduction. Almost everyone has heard of it. Almost anyone who wants to play it has played it, or will play it when they have the time. So when I played it for myself, I battled with a few mindsets, trying to be as unbiased as possible, but already seeing quite a bit of the discussion passively online throughout the years, trying to see how the plot would unfold, but already knowing all the palace hosts. And of course, pretending to be shocked at the twist antagonists I've known about since 2017. The benefit of playing it so late is that I get about 7 years of cool analysis and fan work to look at. The con is that I basically don't think anything I will say here will add anything new or radical to the discussion, but ultimately I just wanted to put my opinion out there. Originally, I was only going to make one video about Persona 5, but I will split my thoughts on the visual design into a second video because, wow, there's a lot to talk about there. This will be more chatty, podcasty type of video with minimal editing compared to my others. Oh yeah, huge spoiler warning for the whole video. I'll be talking about my broad thoughts on the entire game, including the third semester. With casual spoiler talk throughout, it's just a deeper discussion if I don't dance around it. Oh yeah, content warning for talking about difficult subjects in the game. I assume anyone watching this will have played it already, but here's it on the screen. Also, I played Royal, and I have zero experience with the original release past the first few hours. I know of a few changes, but broadly that is my experience and what I'm working off of. I also wrote part of the script after finishing the content from the original game, a bit after finishing the new Royal exclusive content, and the last part after spending some months reflecting on it a bit. So the gameplay section is fresh off the experience, but a lot of the last part of this will be tainted, so to speak, by looking at fan discussions. Additionally, I'll be referring to the protagonist as friend Amamiya instead of his codename Joker. As I'll get into, broadly, I have a lot of praise for Persona 5's story, visuals, character work, dungeon design, puzzles, etc. I think we have the tendency to put games into the category of underrated or overrated, especially with acclaimed games such as this. But personally, I just call Persona 5 perfectly rated. It's not without flaws, but it does get close to that masterpiece label, and I understand why it's an enduringly popular game and influenced a lot of people. But I gotta say, the battle gameplay is actually the part I have the most middling opinion of, so let's get that out of the way first. I think through introducing all of the mechanics very early, the battles tended to lack variety. Just about every battle type you'll have to fight in the game is in the first palace. I thought it was pretty rare for them to mix it up. I'm no expert on gameplay, but I definitely feel like it lacked a lot of unique mechanics compared to other JRPGs I've played, especially for how modern this game is. Guns in particular felt extremely weak, which was disappointing as I felt it was a pretty unique mechanic compared to a lot of the other games, and I look forward to it. The quality of life that makes them stronger, locked behind a confidant I didn't prioritize, was pretty discouraging. Really, it felt worth it to go for a gun attack unless it was a Persona skill like Haru's amazing one-shot kill attack. Subsequently, even though I've had plenty of cash to customize guns all the way, which I did, it still felt quite weak. I've heard that Royal buff guns quite a bit too, so I imagine my complaints would have been higher in the vanilla game. In general, sometimes it really felt like the battle prioritized DPS more than anything. And of course that's important, but it's frustrating when you'd be doing everything right, exploiting all of the weaknesses, and using buffs and baton passes and just not taking the enemy out if you were even slightly underleveled. Many JRPGs have low-level challenge runs that would just not work very well on Persona since so many battles, especially bosses, hit a brick wall if you aren't hitting the DPS requirement. I'm always a bit underleveled in JRPGs to add some difficulty, but Okumura's battle in particular, where the robots run away if you can't defeat all of them in a single turn, forced me to grind from then on. I think Persona 5's gameplay monotony loop really comes down to normal battles really only being try to kill the enemy in the first player phase. With the exception of Reflect and Guarding, there was really nothing to do about enemy phase except hoping to tank it and heal it afterwards, unlike say Mamori from Tokyo Mirage Session, whose whole kit relies on tanking for her party members, or Yashiro with his high counter moveset. There's a counter skill card you can grab, but I do think it's a bit annoying that Ren's the only character who can have a completely unique gameplay style through persona fusions and skill cards. Persona 5's battle ends up being really basic and boring compared to, say, Octopath Traveler, where each normal battle takes like 4 to 5 plus turns and there's a lot of setup. Side note, I think this is why Last Surprise is so successful because vocals and repeatable music in video games rarely work. they get annoying fast. So I think Last Surprise worked because most battles end before you hit the chorus, which, checking real quick, is about 45 seconds. I strongly associate the chorus of Last Surprise with all-out attacks because that's usually playing when the battle ends. I also hated not being able to choose the order of my party members in battle because it resulted in the first character always losing SP much quicker than anyone else. I could waste a turn on guarding or a quick normal attack, and I know now it's based on the agility stat, but I'd still rather not buff it in hindsight when there's more crucial stats to prioritize. Not a deal breaker, but still annoying. Yeah, SP drain is a huge problem. I'd waste a lot of nights in the first few palaces of the game just making curry to futilely hope I could manage a whole palace in a day. I actually think this is a feature and not a flaw, but it's still frustrating to waste days just because you completely ran out of juice with no other options. I know in Kamoshido's palace, I had no choice but to leave for the day when I was legit 1 or 2 rooms away from the treasure room, but if I kept going I would have been completely screwed if I got into another battle. However, one mechanic I absolutely adored was Baton Pass. Really incentivized exploiting everyone's weaknesses and gave a reason to keep using single target attacks. There's battles past the midpoint that require you to do this by pairing enemies with one weakness with another that reflects that attack. So it's a nice mix up on the formula and doesn't really reach its full potential until after you get your full cast, level up their confidants, and unlock the darts minigame. I like that it's a nice gradual growth that doesn't really exist for Persona 5 otherwise. I also like that late game bosses rely on really utilizing that mechanic like Marquis and the Grail. Speaking of Marquis and Baton Passes, I had a complete hell of an experience with the Okumura battle, like apparently everyone else. I actually originally wrote a tangent on how I would have improved this boss, since I wrote a lot of the script about the gameplay after finishing the vanilla game. And then I did the third semester, and literally all my notes were done Marquis' Tentacle battle. I won't go on, but it's just a little annoying. They knew how to make this battle successful, and they didn't really improve it. They just added the idea to another boss, so Okumura crawled so Marquis could sprint. But that's about all my thoughts on battles. It was good, even interesting at times, most interesting in boss battles. But it was pretty straightforward to the point of being a bit boring at times. No major gripes, but it's not the star of the show. So, as I mentioned before, this is my first Persona game. My first Shin Megami Tensei game was Tokyo Mirage Sessions. A fantastic game, by the way. Since finishing this game, I learned other Persona games were actually more like mementos with randomly generated floors. Not really my thing. Honestly, without Ryuji's insta-kill, I would have really disliked mementos. All the palaces were great, though. As far as unique mechanics in almost all of them, such as the statues in Shido's palace, I thought that they were such a great mix-up to exploration. I appreciated the challenge, even in times I struggled with them. I personally prefer when it's a skill issue on my part as far as puzzle difficulty, so I can struggle and feel really satisfied or concede and look up a guide. Versus when puzzles are just too easy. I play Genshin, so it's been really frustrating how they completely nerfed puzzles after Inazuma because 12-year-olds complained. I especially loved Kaneshira's codes. Total Somnium Files vibes. Finally, a game that makes me take notes. I thought Okumura's airlock was a great puzzle that really utilized checking your map over your eyes. As pilots say, trust your instruments. The Go-Ho also prevented me from getting truly stuck, so I'd be more annoyed if I didn't have that. Best palace was Maruki's, hands down. Huge Kingdom Hearts vibes. I kind of wouldn't be surprised if that was an intentional reference, but I'll talk about the third semester later. I also loved Shido's. I loved how unique each section of the ship was. I loved how it all came together with interconnected sections. For how long it was, it never felt repetitive, and it makes sense it was massive and filled with so many people for him. I think size was pretty short for me. I think it was the fastest one to complete. It was a bit annoying how much of it were back rooms. I would have loved to see the casino itself more. I get it, but the back rooms were pretty bland visually, even with posters on the wall. But obviously the casino is a huge visual staple of the game. When we finally walked into it in October, it felt so exciting to see it all come full circle. I also liked how palaces weren't solely about the way they viewed themselves, but their distorted view of the world. There were parts like Kaneshira's bank that was a giant lock that just blew me away, a great representation of how much he's locked himself into the destructive, shallow life he's made. I love Shido's wrath puzzles and how much he looked down on everyone else he didn't view as elite. The palaces were so cool as a general concept too. It really reminds me back when I played Danganronpa, and it was fun to speculate about what executions everyone would get. Or even Somnium Files, where you can dive into people's dreamscapes. I love it when games like this get really into the psyche and you can explore character writing in such a tangible, yet abstract way. It really makes use of the medium of video games as interactable, immersive storytelling. I remember getting excited to try to guess everyone's keywords before the reveal. Shido's especially, since there was a bit more guesswork for him. Atlas really likes Drowned City symbolism, huh? So let's get to the other massive chunk of gameplay experience, social links and free time. Um, so here's my obligatory. Yes, I'm a woman complaining about Persona 5's handling of women. That being said, I don't have a wholly negative opinion and I don't think it ruins the game. I'm not going to say Persona 5 is a misogynistic game. There's more to it than that, so let's get into it. Persona 5 is a game seen through the male gaze, and I don't mean in just that fan service way, but yeah, also in that fan service way. I mean it that is entirely through a male perspective 99% of the time. Which makes sense, your protagonist is a teenage boy. And what I'm saying with that is that I think the game is both very limited in our perspective, experiencing Ren's daily life, and also very generous with our view outside of it, which creates odd situations where we're aware of the wider plot, like with the SIU director scenes, but not necessarily given perspective outside of Ren's. This includes female characters, but also male characters like Ryuji too. Like, what is he doing at any given time? Unless Ren texts or hang out with him, we don't know. It's a complete surprise to us that he's moving away to start physical therapy at the end. By the way, that also created a strange experience where I was super shocked to see Haru's fiance in that cutscene where the thieves hear about Ren's death on the news. I hadn't progressed her confidant enough to see she was still engaged, so I paused the screen and yelled at him to get away from her. Back to the gender talk, I actually think wholly unlike other RPGs like Pokemon, Fire Emblem, Genshin Impact, the plot of this game would be almost fundamentally different with a female protagonist. I think Ren is a protagonist whose situation seems uniquely male in his society. I don't think a teenage girl would be in the situation where she could stand up to a man assaulting another woman. Furthermore, I don't think, especially the first part of the game, would work with a female protagonist because she would be in the role of someone exploited rather than discarded. I mean, compare Mishima's situation to Shiho's. This argument becomes a bit more nebulous as the game evolves, but I think throughout the game Ren is just put into situations where he would not succeed as a female member of society, especially given that the setting is relatively modern-day, real-life Japan, with all the very real sexist barriers and expectations at play. I think it adds a lot of depth to plotlines like Makoto, Sai, Haru, and Ann's, but it's just not a hurdle that Ren ever faces, and there would have to be heavy rewrites for a female protagonist, rather than simply having another gender option. I know Kasumi was considered for a female protagonist design at first, but I'm guessing they realized how much rewriting that entailed. And, well, personally I prefer Kasumi as her own character. By the way, I'm not familiar with Persona 3's female protagonist or plot to comment on how it handled that. I'm sure somebody with a lot more passion and familiarity has written a lot about this. But I don't view this as a flaw. I think Ren's story is incredible. I think he's a great protagonist. But it does run into some situations, occasionally, that I personally hated. To be blunt, I think genuinely 100% Ren Amamiya as a character is not straight. He's absolutely bisexual, and this isn't wishful thinking, I just genuinely believe this to be canon. Obviously this isn't reflected mechanically, but like, come on. But the game's writing does not let him interact with men the same way he interacts with women. I think this is a massive shame because it results in, at the same time, his interactions with women are always threaded with the gameplay potential to start a romantic relationship, with the amazing exception of Sainijima. This makes female confidants just less interesting than they could be, and more shallow than the male confidants. In my opinion, a lot more male confidants just end up being a lot deeper than the female ones. Iwai, Sojiro, Akechi, and Yusuke have some of the best ones in the game. I'm pretty comfortable saying Sojiro's is the best, hands down. In my opinion, some of the worst ones are the female confidants. To be clear, I'm not saying all the female confidants are bad, but even in the most innocent sense, it ends up just creating odd situations where you have to reject girls at the end of what seems like a serious conversation. Like, is this the time? Hans is the one that feels really inappropriate, but it's the only way to not start a relationship with her. It feels so out of character for Ren to say that, especially given that he's been good friends with her for what's probably been months at this point. It feels like such a weird place to add that relationship trigger. And I have a lot of praise for Takemi's confidant, but it felt odd for her to imply that Ren would have only wanted to help her because he wanted to sleep with her. At least she backs off and goes, okay, sure, I won't push it, but it feels very all men are pigs to me. Like, maybe that's why he would have approached her. I mean, yeah, she's hot, but like, a child's life is on the line and you think, wow, this guy must be down bad. I'd personally put the relationship trigger earlier in the confidant, so it doesn't suddenly trigger at the end of a serious character arc resolution. Like say Chihiya's where she suddenly asks if you like older women. If you say no, you could just turn off the relationship trigger later. Kawakami's felt odd how you can like literally insult her the entire time and have zero bearing on starting a relationship. Like I know there's some rejection triggers for other adult women, but it seems obtuse to even get it. And I think it should exist for girls in your age group too. By the way, I don't actually have that much beef with the harem thing. I acknowledge it's a goofy comedic gag. It's a very unserious scene making fun of a very unserious scenario. It seems pointless to waste time complaining about it. To be honest, I prefer Fire Emblem's approach on making romance pretty much non-existent, unless you specifically trigger S supports or special scenes, barring certain characters who do like the protagonist canonically. But if Persona's approach was the way they wanted to continue to do so, the ability to opt out earlier by making it clear it's not your intention is what I'd prefer. Yeah, while we're here, let's talk about fan service, that kind. Listen, I get that it's a staple of RPGs, even the most classy of them. I broadly consider myself a fan service enjoyer. My tolerance level for this thing is probably a lot higher than a lot of my female peers. I'm not broadly against the game having that aspect. Heck, I think Ann's Phantom Thief outfit is way better than her concept art and all the Modesty edit redesigns out there. It's a good design. But yeah, no, the fan service was genuinely excessive at times. The entire summer vacation arc was such a schlop to get through, barring the palace itself. The amount of time dedicated to sweaty girls in cars or beach bikinis when it could have just been more interesting animated 2D cutscenes of I don't know, anything else. I would have loved to see a 2D flashback of Futaba and her mom instead. Or even Ren, Sujiro, and Futaba all together. 2D cutscenes got better with Royal exclusive content, but it genuinely creates hours worth of the game that just aren't fun to me. I wouldn't say fan service proportionally overpowers the game, but every time I think about that dumb bikini scene in Shido's palace, I want to take my PS4 disc and bury it in the mulch. We're about to give the Prime Minister of Japan a lobotomy. Is now really the time? Hawaii? Hawaii was bad. Let's not talk about Hawaii. Now, to address the elephant in the room, the adult romances. It's a weird paradox with the adult characters, where most players are their age, but the player character isn't. So I'm a woman pushing 30, playing as a 17-year-old boy. So of course I like Takemi, of course I do. But I don't want Ren, the protagonist I'm controlling, to date her. Doesn't help that they constantly bring it up in their confidants going, "Oh, but you're a teenager, so let's not get weird." And then just proceeds to get weird, which I gotta say, bringing it up a lot calls more attention to it. It's like a shame thing, being into a taboo. That's the appeal. I think with what I've suggested before about there being earlier relationship triggers, most of my complaints would be nil. Again, I play Fire Emblem games. There are romance options that I just don't like at all. If the developers wanted to include these romances, there's not much I, one fan, could do to change their mind by complaining about it. They'll be in the game. The biggest issue is that unlike in Fire Emblem where it's 100% on you if the relationship starts by hitting the S support button, Persona 5's romance is baked into all the female confidants, and thus a major part of the social sim aspect of the game by default, and you have to reject them at the end of the 9th rank, so close to the end. If it was just one confidant, I would not be complaining about this. It'd be pointless, but it makes up a third of the female ones, 4 out of 5 of the adult ones. And if opting out early, or there not being implied romance until the romance trigger was an option, honestly, I would not be complaining about it again. Like the harem option, I get they wanted to include it and some people really like it. And that's fine. I wouldn't really pay any mind if it was easily avoidable. I don't complain this much about Roy and Cecilia's marriage ending in Fire Emblem The Binding Blade because, well, I don't like that it exists, but it's entirely on the players to pursue that. But in general though, I do think it's contradictory to Persona 5's themes of youth rebellion to be constantly putting Ren in situations that age him up, like hanging out with adult women, working at a bar, having his older friends like Makoto comment that he seems so mature for his age. He gets mistaken as an adult sometimes. Is he a 17-year-old high schooler being oppressed in a society where youth is fleeting yet also exploited, or is he a guy who is definitely navigating adult spaces and even being a mentor to the adults around him? I'm not saying I want more school confidants because that just make him seem more welcome in school, which he's not, but it's just the framing is off, the way they talk about him is off. And again, this is a problem pretty exclusive to the female confidants, contrasted with how fatherly the adult male confidants are. Probably because of the romance potential, it's hard to rizz someone up who's saying you're like a son to them. Again, Sai seems to be one of the only exceptions to this. I loved her send-off to him on the last day of the game. Sweet to see her want to protect Ren after so many adults and mentors in his life have failed him, and reaffirm that she'll have his back if the world does not. Ultimately, I really like all of the adult women in this game. Their confidants can be really interesting and tie back nicely to the game's thesis, like Chihaya's cult situation, or Kawakami showing the failure of the school system and how she needs to be more proactive to make sure she can be that exception for her students. I've already raved about Takemi's confidant, 10 out of 10. Oya gets a lot of shit, but I respect that she's integrated with the plot well. She shows up very early in Madarame's arc, and she's the most believable cast member to be one of the ones to pull strings to help Ren get out of juvie. And her confidant brings more attention to the mental shutdown cases. Honestly, an aspect of the game I kind of wish they touched on more. I actually almost forgot about it at one point. And I'll get into both of them later, but that's actually why I like Ren's relationship with Sumire and Akechi so much. For Sumire, or Kasumi at the time, their interactions are classic shoujo manga at the beginning. Unlike his other confidants where he's so mature for his age, he's a reliable senpai, sure, but she brings him back down to earth and they both act their age around each other. I do think it's cute how Ren gets to experience kind of like that classic meet cute high school romance with her with all the gushy tropes. They walk together on an umbrella, they dance like idiots at a school function. Now, is it a facade to ultimately shatter the illusion later when Kasumi isn't Kasumi? Sure, but their experiences were real. Now with Akechi, I think it brings them both down to earth. Akechi is a boy brought into the world of adults, play acting the part of a peer, while unknowingly being thrown away and regarded as a foolish child and a tool. So I really love his social links for bringing him down a little bit and just letting him goof off as a teenage boy for once. Sure, there's a large spoonful of foreshadowing and narrative foil tension, but it's the only confidant where there isn't a goal established at the beginning. He really is just inviting Ren to hang out with him. It's under the pretense of debating perspectives, sure. And Akechi's very unsubtly investigating him. But they're just chatting. Akechi reminisces about his childhood, plays at an arcade, and hangs out at a cafe. And Ren meets him as a friend, rival, and equal rather than the rescuer of some dilemma, or a mentor, or a leader. It's really refreshing to see them both like this. Like Akechi says, it's a massive shame they didn't meet a few years earlier. It's pretty easy to imagine them as childhood friends by the way they act in this confidant. I'll get more into these two later when I get to the third semester. Pivoting a bit, I also feel like the confidant system is a bit flawed. I'm just spitballing here. I'm going to compare it to Fire Emblem's support system a bit. I think supports work so well because they're perfect 3-act little stories. The length depends on the game, and Three Houses even has some 4-step ones, as supports add another rank. Confidants have the flexibility to get deeper due to the sheer length of 10 whole ranks rather than 3 to 4, which is fantastic most of the time. The issue with this is just padding, so to speak. Honestly, it felt like some confidants just kind of meandered for several ranks. Kawakami's is the worst of this. Oya's also really stands out. I just said what I liked about it. It honestly could have been condensed to like 5 ranks. Most of the ranks, she's just kind of yapping while drunk and complaining about her job. An's confidant is one where I don't view in each individual rank as bad by itself. They're good, but together it kind of comes across as jumping all over the place. An's thankfully super well written in the plot, so this has less bearing on her overall writing, but I wouldn't rank her confidants as one of the better ones. I'm not wholesale suggesting confidants should be 3 steps like Fire Emblem, I just think maybe not all characters need that much time to fill to communicate the stories they're trying to tell. Yeah, I think the largest thing missing from Persona when I compare it to Fire Emblem is just one-on-one conversations between your party members. I think the plot really establishes the Phantom Thieves as a proper friend group. Like, no complaints on that. Their text conversations help a ton. I think the early game group of Ren, An, and Ryuji feel super close-knit. I like that Ryuji shows up in An's confidant. Yusuke too feels part of that group to a slightly lesser extent, but some of the only times your friends get to talk to each other without Ren standing there is like Makoto and An's reconciliation after Kaneshira's palace, or the Showtime unlocking cutscenes, the little mementos back and forths. There's the Thieves' Den stuff too, but that's dubiously canon. It's Ren's cognition of his friends. Actually, one of Akechi's mementos conversations contradicts a Thieves' Den conversation, showing Ren actually imagines Akechi to be more stubborn than he was in reality. And that's like a small percentage of scenes in roughly 150 hours worth of game. I feel like the huge appeal of supports in Fire Emblem is people getting to show different sides of themselves around different people. Take Lucina from Fire Emblem Awakening. Around Jerome, she's comfortable with him, yet it's a serious conversation. They're talking about surviving an apocalypse together. Around Inigo, she can learn to smile a bit. Around her mom and siblings, she shows her goofy side. And wouldn't that be cool to see for, say, Makoto? Her surprisingly silly side that she shows with Ryuji in their Showtime scene. Her big sister energy around Futaba. Her earnestly wanting female friends with An and letting herself be a teenage girl with her. I'd love to see more of that. But I wouldn't be able to say what her dynamic is with, say, Yusuke off the top of my head. I know the fandom headcanons her and Haru as being the mom and dad of the group. Maybe that's something seen more in Strikers, so why not show it? Show Makoto reacting to being cared for instead of stepping up and being the one in charge all the time. And Makoto's a generous example. There's some characters like Haru and Yusuke who feel even less connected to the rest of the gang. Like, what the heck is Haru's relationship to Ryuji? What would they even talk about? Back to me saying this game is presented through a 99% male, aka Ren's perspective. It's just a shame that these small morsels are the only scenes where women just talk to each other. Listen, the Bechdel test is not a formal gauge of how #feminist the work is. It's a joke from a lesbian cartoonist that we will claim anything when given the littlest of crumbs. But man, it does feel applicable sometimes. Besides the few scenes I mentioned and the little crumbs of interaction, the only other times women talk to each other, off the top of my head, is like Sai and Makoto scenes and a few of An and Shiho scenes early on. I mean, this would have been a non-issue if we just got more time of the cast bonding one-on-one. I mean, obviously they do hang out. So in a game about masks, the personas that you put up around different people in different situations, it seems like a big missed opportunity to not showcase that happening with anyone other than Ren. I feel like I know these characters, there's just a massive chunk of their life I'm missing because the game won't show it to me. Again, the game makes you aware of the wider plot, the conspiracy, but the perspective is just very limited. I feel like something like a sports system would have made characters like An and Yusuke feel less like they fell off because they weren't really relevant to the plot anymore at a certain point. Also, I really loved this Thieves' Den conversation between Yusuke and Akechi, and I wish it was in the story proper. To talk about the plot a bit, honestly, I don't have too much to say about the vanilla game. It does its job. It's tight, it works, it's great. Honestly, I feel like the parts that don't work stick out the most because the rest of the game is so successful. I don't really feel like I have to go through and do a play-by-play of it because what else is there to say? But I do think the one part of the plot that's sloppy that apparently everyone agrees with is the Okumura arc, and I don't think it's terrible. I actually really love the general direction in certain scenes of it. Honestly, Ryuji and Morgana's fight felt inevitable. I feel like the game would be worse without it. I loved how we saw Akechi kill Okumura after everyone fled, so we, the audience, just spend the remaining days before the mental shutdown, like completely dreading it. Screaming when they decide to go to Disneyland to celebrate. Oh no! But it does show its cracks more than any other arc. I really love that they got framed into thinking they actually killed the guy. Like they only have 4 successes under their belt. What if it was just them getting lucky? They completely made peace with the fact that Kamoshida might die, but they haven't had to do that with anyone else. I don't think they would have even attempted to change Futaba's heart after Okumura's. But it does add more depth to Haru's pain since most players might not care if Okumura dies. He kinda sucks. Sure, it's terrible to suddenly lose a parent no matter how strained your relationship is, but it's way worse being framed into thinking you were the one who did it. Personally, I really don't get the complaint that Haru was completely shafted. I think, especially after the new royal content, she doesn't join the group too late. There's still 4 whole palaces. 4 out of 8 without Haru is only 50% of the game. And she's super strong in battle, and her confidant is one of the best in my opinion. I think I'd tweak a few scenes in Okumura's palace, but otherwise I have few complaints. But if I was asked to improve her writing, my suggestion would be to unlock Haru's confidant before her recruitment, like a Sumire situation. Besides Yusuke that attends a different school, every other member besides Haru is either heavily hinted at or established within the first month. Makoto has at least a couple scenes off the top of my head. Futaba calls Sajuro a few times at the beginning of the game and is part of his confidant. Haru makes 1 or 2 cameos, but besides that, she feels very disconnected. Our group didn't even realize she was even a Shujin student, despite how much her design stands out. Her first 5 ranks in this new structure I'm proposing would focus mostly on her passion for gardening and interest in coffee, with a few crumbs of foreshadowing about her father and fiancé situation. Access to her garden would also make a bit more sense in the summer months rather than like autumn and winter when it's actively snowing. If they were concerned about access to SP items too early in the game, maybe make them unlock later. Maybe Ren and Haru bump into each other when she's going to the roof to work on her garden. Perhaps right before the thieves' hideout changes to Shibuya, she remarks that he smells like coffee. Ren says he lives in a cafe. She's interested in that and talks about her garden. He does that confidant thing where he goes, well, food is fuel. Metaverse. This'll help the Phantom Thieves. Let's talk to her. Boom, easy segue. Not too different from Sumire, where they bump into each other, talk a bit, and he asks for her advice on moving more nimbly. Ren and Haru start a friendship, and she can establish herself more before her entrance into the plot proper. Maybe this would have culminated in them talking a bit more on the Hawaii trip, where Haru felt, completely irrelevant. Maybe this is where she reveals her arranged marriage. Have Ren take more than a momentary notice of Big Bang Burger's overseas reach. him feeling conflicted about the public demanding a change of Okumura's heart. This would have been more resonant if there was an emotional connection there. He feels like he's walking into a trap. Okumura sucks, but he's not the only corrupt businessman out there, and they need to lay low. But he can't just abandon a friend. I think spitballing further is getting more into the weeds than I feel like I need to. But again, I just think Persona 5 is an otherwise really polished story, so it makes sense the slappy part would stand out more. To quickly summarize my broad thoughts on the rest of the plot, I thought Madarame was the most interesting early game villain, but I'm also a professional illustrator who used to work in an art museum, so it'd be shocking if I didn't love it. I'm also a huge fan of Eastern art, especially traditional Japanese art and folklore, so everything about that palace and use case persona is super up my alley. Kamoshida is a weird pick for the first arc villain. I think they handled the subject matter really well, but it's just an uncomfortable experience. Well done, but uncomfortable. I think if I wasn't committed to seeing justice done and experiencing the rest of the game, I can imagine an alternate reality where this freaks me out so much that I drop the game. Shido is my favorite late game villain. He's very much in that love to hate him category, I think. I actually realized writing this that I might genuinely like the guy. He sucks, but he's so compelling in his narrative role. His design's incredible. I'm pretty sure the lion is a Fullmetal Alchemist reference, but even the fact that his boss is called the Beast of Human Sacrifice is cool as hell. And he doesn't have a unique shadow form until he just, decides to. Cool as hell. Speaking of, this would be a good segue into Akechi, but I'll briefly talk about the Grail and the vanilla ending. Honestly, I think until I watched Moon Channel's excellent Why Do We Always Kill Gods in JRPGs video, which I skipped the Persona 5 part and resumed that section upon completing the game, I broadly understood it, but it didn't quite click yet. I wasn't very moved by it. I think now that I have more cultural context, I can appreciate it more. I think this is something I would have gotten more out of if I was a classic Shin Megami Tensei Persona fan, but I think the heel turn from fairly realistic methods and stakes, like a blend of psychology and light fantasy, to fairly abstract, unexplained Velvet Room and apocalyptic stake stuff, was a pinch too sudden for me. I think we weren't really given an explanation on many things. I'm not a psychologist, but I took a handful of psychology classes in college, so nothing about the palaces and such were out of my depth. But what's the deal with Lavenza and everyone? Who the fuck is Igor? What is the metaverse? What's the Velvet Room? What does it mean to destroy the metaverse? I'm not opposed to metaphors and rolling with the punches. I'm literally a massive Kingdom Hearts fan. But I feel like I missed something major. I feel like the ending was great, but it also left me with a lot of questions. I feel like I didn't have a lot of time to feel emotionally moved by everything because I was just very confused. And maybe they weren't expecting people to only play Persona 5 and not the other entries. But up until this point, Persona felt very standalone with only brief references to other games. I won't say this is an outright flaw of the storytelling, but it did bog down my experience. I feel like I hit a brick wall as far as connection to the storyline because I didn't understand the lore. What I found super interesting was the comment that Ren and Akechi were two champions picked by the God of Control to fight for and against humanity's salvation. It was a single line that was not elaborated on at all. Go back to that. I want to know more about that. With how much apparently Royal added to Akechi's character, I'm surprised that there was zero elaboration on that. Was he even aware of Yaldabaoth? It certainly doesn't seem so when he says something along the lines of, "Whoever gave me this power, God or devil," yet he didn't seem confused at all about them talking about Mariki taking over for the Grail in the third semester. Huh? I think if I had played vanilla Persona 5, I would have rated it 6 out of 10 as far as personal impact. And I don't think I would have played Royal, but I think the third semester Royal stuff bumps the game up much higher in personal impact. So why did my opinion improve so much? I have not disguised the fact that Goro Akechi is my favorite character from this game. Sumire as a very close runner-up, maybe even tied. Mariki's Palace is the peak of the game to me. I think because the dynamic of these characters with the protagonist really hammers home the thesis and emotional core of Persona 5's narrative. I wouldn't trade the Grail on what it means, but the third semester felt like it really stuck the landing and provided a more grounded resolution to the themes. If the fight with the Grail represents the hero's resolve over their ideals for society as a collective, I think the fight against Mariki represents the hero's resolve over their ideals on what it means for each of them to live. What does it mean to make your heart a prison? What does it mean to be happy? Is a false happiness better than a reality full of pain? Can we truly move on from the painful memories and live a happy future? What does it mean to go from being a rebellious kid to a hopefully not rotten adult? And what does control mean? With Yaldabaoth, it's abstract. Mementos is the palace of the people. If people are locked up in mementos, they are not literally imprisoned in the real world. It's a metaphor for how they are chained to the social contract. People are scared to speak out about abuse, and they stick with jobs that underpay and overwork them to death. They yield to authority for a crumb of respect that's easily lost and hard won. Even the palace rulers violated the social contract by cutting out their own path within society, if through immoral ways. Not much different from the thieves, which is why they were rejected by that god. But Yaldabaoth isn't a character. He is a representation of a concept. He's an argument against a thesis. He can't feel happiness nor pain, so I can't connect with him. But with Maruki's own control of reality to shape it into a world of happiness, we see a more tangible representation of control. As well-meaning and genuine as Maruki comes off as, he really is just shackling humanity again. To err is human, to grieve and cry is just part of life, to struggle is to live. This is why I love Sumiri's conversation with Ren about Maruki so much. She can't truly resent him because pretending to be Kasumi did genuinely help her grieve. And she doesn't think she'd have the courage to expand her world and meet Ren and unlock her persona without going, what would Kasumi do? But that's all it was, a way to cope with the immediate loss. A coping mechanism that stopped working pretty quickly. The cracks were already showing when her confidant unlocked, which was 2 months in. She needed to be given better long-term treatment. This gray morality is what makes this arc so interesting to me. There's no heroes or villains, there's no thesis and rebuttal, there's just people trying their hardest to survive. Maruki tried his hardest to survive, to cope with the loss of the love of his life, his research he toiled for years to complete, his dreams for his personal and professional life crumbled to dust. This is why I find the stay ending so upsetting. He didn't even use his powers to create a world where he gets everything he wants. He let Rumi go, he wasn't given any recognition for his work. He just wanted to make everyone else happy. That's the thing about Maruki that makes him so intriguing. He could have been a member of the Phantom Thieves. He's so similar to Ren. He too used his persona to try to change people's cognition and make the world a better place. He also suffered badly because of the world. He was also a victim of Shido's selfish carelessness. It's very easy to imagine Ren going down a similar path of just wanting to help as many people as possible. I mean, isn't that what you do in game? Take as many memento quests as possible, change the hearts of people around town, and do your best to remove the pain from their lives? It would be remiss of me to not mention this game's fantastic voice acting. I actually was pretty on the fence about playing English or Japanese voiceover. Ultimately though, I picked English. First of all, many of the voice talents in the game are ones I'm already a fan of. For example, I've been a fan of Robbie Damon since about 2014, with his work on the Sailor Moon Viz dub, and later Final Fantasy XV. So, wow, it's been 10 years. So it was great to see what many people consider his best role. He absolutely killed it. Several other VAs like Shermie Lay and Xanthe Hune, I was also excited to hear their work in the game. I've been recently loving Laura Post's work, like Somnium Files, so it was amazing to hear her in this game too, voicing one of my favorite characters. Everyone in the cast did a great job. But the main reason is that I really wanted to hear Billy Kometz as Maruki. He tragically passed away a couple years ago. At first I thought it'd be too sad to hear him, but ultimately, I really wanted to appreciate the art he left behind. He truly did an exceptional job on this game. Some scenes were just heartbreaking. He nailed it, really. I'm glad I experienced it. And I can't imagine anyone else but him in the role. I think I'd be here all day if I was raving about the English voice performances, and while I could go on and on, I will simply just say everyone had wonderful performances and worthy of boatloads of praise. Very, very well done. I'm glad Royal apparently added more voice scenes. I would have loved it if confidants were voiced too. Even though I don't approve of his actions, I can't bring myself to dislike Maruki. I don't consider him a villain, just a force on the opposite side of an argument. He's not trying to hurt people, he just earnestly believes his method is correct. And he takes it too far and throws client consent out of the equation. But it's so hard to tell him no, he's wrong. Did Maruki deserve anything that happened to him? Did Sumire? Did Ren? Did Akechi? Did any of the Phantom Thieves? Does anyone deserve tragedy? No, but life is just unfair. It sucks sometimes. But you'll never face genuine happiness without pain. Sumire would have never been genuinely happy without truly facing the loss of Kasumi and deciding to mourn, honor, and move on. She tried really, really hard to find what she needed with the false happiness as Kasumi, and it didn't work out. She kept failing. One design thing I love is that Ella holds a bouquet of lilies. Lilies are a pretty common funeral flower in Japan, so I think ultimately Sumire learned to carry both love and grief with her. Similar to the fairy tale princess, she was able to move on while holding what hurt her and turn it into love. That's actually why I love her and Ren as a couple so much. It feels so natural. I think if Akechi is Ren's antithesis, Sumire feels like his complement. Yeah, life sucks. The cards are stacked against you and things happen. But we can't do anything else but move on. And sometimes you'll find love in a sea of grief. Quote, if I can just hang on to this warm place in my mind, I can push myself further than I've ever gone before. I also love that she's the one in the ending scene, further emphasizing the thesis and reminding Ren he helped her move forward and she's going to push him the same way. I think it's a very optimistic and sweet viewpoint. It feels like Ren and Sumire are each other's silver lining. So I think it's really reductive to proclaim that we only knew Sumire for the last month before the end of the Mariki arc. It's been her the whole time. In fact, we don't know Kasumi at all. Even Sumire's view of her was quite biased and honestly tainted by both grief and jealousy. Her coach even confirmed Kasumi wasn't as confident and overwhelmingly talented as Sumire remembered her being, and Kasumi was jealous of her. Mariki gave Sumire the tool to pull the wool over her eyes, but Sumire wished for that veil to deceive her in the first place. Perspective is inherently biased, and because looking at events objectively is almost impossible for the average human. So it's not as though Sumire transformed herself into Kasumi the way one might be possessed in different media, like a Kingdom Hearts situation. Sumire was simply given the tools to manifest a wish like, I wish I was confident like Kasumi, I wish I was Kasumi, and make it so. To become Kasumi is a shameful wish made real. I love Sumire learning not to reject her coping method and moving forward. It really doesn't matter that Sumire started wearing her hair in a ponytail again because she wanted to become that. A confident, happy person capable of victory. Everything she describes about Kasumi is really just her describing traits she wanted to be. And so she became, naturally this time. The second half of her confidant chain is about her taking Kasumi off of the pedestal, not projecting her ideal self onto her and becoming that ideal instead. The real Kasumi exists in a zone similar to, say, Futaba's mother, Wakaba, who only appears as a memory. You don't even get a flashback of Wakaba like with Kasumi. And Wakaba is an interesting case of this. I was looking at the art book, and the proclamation that she prioritized work over the home was super interesting. It said sure that she's a workaholic, but the statement from the devs that they were avoiding a maternal image entirely is fascinating. The way Futaba, after her change of heart, remembered her was very loving, if busy. She obviously worships her, and it made me realize how much we as an audience just know absolutely nothing about her. Sojiro seems to be nursing an unrequited love for her, even if he can view her with a perspective outside of biased filial piety. But he seems pretty clueless about the specifics of her work. Shido's relationship is so vague, yet it seems he places a lot of importance, if extremely transactionary, on her. He even talks about only her in his palace Woolsey chambers, instead of, his own son. And he seems genuinely frustrated he died, or at least her research did. Interesting. I've seen some theories about Wakaba's research and mental shutdown, and it's so hard to really suss out the truth of the situation. Other than Shido made the call, yet seems to regret it now, and it was probably Akechi's first mental shutdown, but he's a complete brick wall as far as revealing any more information about it. He looks a little bothered upon seeing Maruki's reality version of her. And considering even Shido regrets it and he doesn't really even have empathy, you really gotta wonder about Akechi's reaction. This is all to say, I would love a prequel like anything for Persona 5. I get it's mysterious on purpose, but I want to know the juicy details. Speaking of, the Maruki reality versions of Wakaba and Okumura are fascinating. Like I said, we only see Wakaba the way Futaba remembers her. And it's interesting the Maruki, creating Futaba's ideal world, turns Wakaba into the opposite of how the developers meant for her to be. She never once mentions work. She makes one joke about rejecting funding, and it's only meant to be a cute conversation with Futaba. Otherwise, she's not wearing her work uniform at all. She exists solely to be that motherly figure to Futaba, because that's what Futaba always wanted. And it's just so much more painful to me with Haru's version of Okumura. Oh my god, we get to meet the real Okumura, and he's nothing like this. You can imagine maybe this is what he would be like if the change of heart was successful. But it's unrecognizable. It's so sad for Haru to be delusional enough to wish for this. And I get it, I totally get it. I don't know how to transition into this, so I'll just say it. The more I think about it, the more I'm convinced that Akechi's mom didn't end her own life. Like, why was the modus operandi for Wakaba and her the exact same? There's like no way two women aligned with Shido both had maternity neurosis within a few years. I don't deny that it was probably very difficult for Akechi's mother to raise him alone. Especially unlike Wakaba, she didn't have a stable nor respected job in her society. But it's just a little too suspicious it was the exact same scenario. And this was revealed about Akechi immediately after Futaba's palace, where this fact is fresh in our mind. I'm just a little surprised that I haven't seen more people propose this as a theory. Regardless, I really don't think that this changes Akechi's situation, if my theory is true, because he has his own version of the truth, and it's tainted his world so acutely. It's kind of like the Final Fantasy VII fandom's fixation on Sephiroth's parentage. Does it really matter if Sephiroth's biological father is Vincent or Hojo? To Sephiroth, it is Hojo, and he hates that. So I don't think it changed Akechi's character, or let's put it this way. I don't think it magically fixed him if my theory was correct. That's still a tragic truth he's lived with for much of, maybe more than half of his life at this point. Comparing Akechi to Futaba is interesting because they are quite alike but cope with their situation in completely different ways. By the way, I do think Futaba's biological father might be Shido, at least from designs alone. Like, I saw Shido's Tomb of Human Sacrifice and went, yeah. I don't think it'll ever be confirmed, and I don't think it really adds much to her storyline anyway. Again, back to the Sephiroth thing, it really doesn't matter what the audience knows or thinks. For Futaba, her character is shaped by Wakaba, Sojiro, the thieves, and her shitty uncle to an extent. Back to Akechi, I do think his issues with his parents end up tainting his view of men and women as a whole. Broadly, he views his father as a monster and his mother as a victim, so he always has a very volatile relationship with men. The only man he genuinely likes is Ren, and he can't really accept that. He interprets those overwhelming feelings as hate. And the small truth that cognitive Akechi reveals that wasn't surprising to me at all, that Akechi does secretly crave his father's affection. I mean, yeah, I think that's why Akechi has such trouble expressing friendship and love towards Ren. The only other person he wants to pay attention to him and give him praise has a billion layers of baggage attached to it. I think this monster victim complex is most starkly shown in how he interacts with Makoto and Yusuke. Makoto is probably the girl he has the most aggressive relationship with. And yet, instead of outright hostility, he's more so just seems to pity her like she's a sad little dog. And I have no doubt that if Yusuke was a girl, Akechi's attitude would be quite different because broadly, Yusuke is a victim. Sure, he was a bit of a dick during Madarame's arc, but you can't really blame him for being groomed. But no, Akechi's so hostile and aggressive to him. I think that's what makes his relationship with Ren interesting. Maybe at first Akechi was desperate to prove he was right. But when Ren was a genuinely good guy who dealt with tragedy with a deft and honestly lucky hand, it must have really messed with Akechi's worldview. Quote, how can someone like you have things I don't? Akechi's such a sad character to me because it was obvious he was never given the tools to succeed from day one. I don't think he has much resentment for his mom by the way he talks about her. I've talked a lot in my personal life about the transition from viewing your parents as parents to starting to view them as people, and I know a lot of people, it's a very deep, almost upsetting truth. To reach the age where you understand your parents as a peer rather than, well, the most important person in your life who'd do anything for you, and as an actualized human being with flaws. I'm very lucky that it felt gradual and natural for me. But for someone like Akechi, it must have felt so sudden. His dialogue with his mom veers from one extreme to the next. He must have had to start viewing her not as a mother, but as a human woman with her own grievances so quickly, especially since he believes himself and Shido to be the cause of those grievances. The way he talks about it, it's like it was just yesterday, and also a whole lifetime ago. But everything after his mom's death, I can't imagine how much it messed with his mind to live like that. Not even just the foster care system. You have to imagine how he's lived for years since he awoke to his persona, since he was completely unaware of the process to change a heart. I mean, an abused orphan thrown into mementos by himself, where he sees the darkest desires of everyone around him, their worst, darkest thoughts, with no methods to deal with that other than fighting back. No tools other than a mental shutdown or a psychotic breakdown. It's extremely easy to see how he's become so jaded, how he assumes everyone would react with violence or corruption. It is the world he's familiar with, both above and below. I imagine how many people he's surrounded with who have a palace. I'm willing to bet most of, if not all, the politicians, policemen, media producers, financial specialists on Cheeto's side have a palace. Imagine seeing the shadows of his classmates in mementos. Even Sai has a palace. I don't think she's fundamentally evil, just corrupted by the system. The same system Akechi is play acting as a peer in. Contrast that to Ren. Sure, the false charge was devastating and fundamentally changed the normalcy of his life for good. You can see why Akechi is so resentful about how well things have gone for Ren. I think it does make Ren exceptionally good as a person to be a good person when there's no reason to be. I'm reminded of a recent incident where an idol was assaulted at Comiket, and none of the other attendees did a single thing to help her. Nor did the police deliver justice to the perpetrator. And it makes me upset to know Ren isn't a self-insert. Many people would not do what he did. He isn't an everyday man, he's exceptional. And that's very upsetting. But Akechi was not given the peers, the guardians, the second chances that Ren was given. This is all before we start factoring in gods gambling the fate of humanity on them. This is why I think discussions of, is Akechi a good or bad person, are like, so boring. Yeah, what do you want me to say? Murder is wrong? Of course that's true, but that's all there is to that conversation thread. It's more meatier and interesting to approach Akechi as a character in a narrative than putting tally marks every time he did something bad. One thing that sticks out to me is that Akechi did not wish for his mother back in Maruki's reality. I think that Akechi has accepted his mother is well and truly gone, and she's never coming back. And sure, Maruki never learned about Akechi's past, but he can change the cognition of others he's never met before. It's reasonable to assume that if the narrative thought that Akechi should prioritize the potential happiness of a happy family, it would bend to that. But Akechi doesn't bring back his mother, and he doesn't create a world where his father loves him. Because I think at this point, Akechi valued his future with Ren than hanging on to the past and wishing it was happier. Let's put it another way. I don't think he bothers yearning for the past because I think functionally he views his younger self as a different person. His childhood with his mother was a completely different lifetime. Shido's loving presence is a complete impossibility. I also can't help but wonder what Akechi would have chosen had the perfect reality been formed before Sai's palace. Akechi chose his revenge over Ren. But would taking Shido down actually make him happy? Or would it satisfy a deep, long grudge and drive for revenge? It's interesting to chew on. For this reason, I don't think Akechi needed a palace. I think we got it. Everything in his confidant, everything in January. It feels more revealing and stark than a palace would have been. I know Akechi on a deeper level than, say, Kaneshiro. I think he effectively had a change of heart at the end of Shido's palace. Let's talk about the engine room. I'm glad I didn't play vanilla Persona 5, because I love the scene by all means, and I think it's really well executed. But it's so heartbreaking if this is how Akechi exited the narrative, if this is how he died. While the Phantoms came to the conclusion that Akechi was a victim they couldn't save, I'm still torn on how quickly they moved on from him. An especially was so distraught. On some level, I wonder how much she saw Shiho in him, how much she saw him, in a sense, standing at the edge of a rooftop like her, wishing that she could have talked her down and trying her best to tell Akechi, it's okay, just come with us. And of course, all the Phantoms see an aspect of their lives in Akechi. So I think his death is so ironic and cruel. He's killed by a version of himself that exists in his father's psyche. So in one way, you could see that act as a representation of both the way his mom died and how his father wanted him dead. And isn't that just the saddest thing you've ever heard? I think it's antithetical to Persona 5's theme of that atonement is a stronger punishment than death. So I dislike seeing fans interpret Akechi's death as a noble sacrifice. I really don't think there's anything noble about an abused child with a bullet in him at the bottom of the cognitive sea. It's a tragedy. Akechi was a victim. He subverts the idea of a perfect, helpless victim. He did 1,000 things wrong in the pursuit of a goal he knew was delusional, but a victim nonetheless. The third semester Akechi is just so sad to see. He can't avenge his mother, and his father never loved him. It's a fantasy. He chose that over Ren, someone who truly cared about him despite everything. Remember, the last few ranks of his confidant, Ren knows he's going to kill him. And he is, as far as he knows, a walking corpse who will croak for the sake of the world. It's also another ding against Maruki's own theory that he resurrected Akechi for Ren's sake. Because remember, Wakaba and Okumura's personalities changed to what their loved ones remembered, or wished them to be like. And Akechi, in fact, acted very differently from Ren's memory of him. He's callous and jaded in a way we did not see before the engine room. And like I said before, the Thieves' Den is Ren's cognition of his friends. And he imagines Akechi to be too stubborn to think the thieves are changing Shido's heart. And yet Akechi does so in Mementos. He can't only be breathing because of Ren, because this version of Akechi isn't tied to Ren. Also, Maruki never met this version of Akechi. He did, however, undoubtedly see the Detective Prince facade of Akechi on TV. And, well, Akechi is back to being that pleasant boy in the state ending. The art book confirmed that this was genuine happiness, but I grapple with this a lot. The first time I got this ending, I had such a pit of dread in my stomach. Considering Akechi explicitly says he does not want this to happen, it's hard to be happy about him being happy. I mean, yeah, we win, but God, at what cost? It really reminds me of that part of the movie Inception, where Cobb says that the version of his wife that haunts his dreams is just a shade to her, with none of the imperfections or complexities. Is Akechi Akechi? Is he the guy that Ren loves? Is this what Ren valued? Ren still cared for and sought out Akechi even when the guy put a bullet in his skull. It seems twisted and just sad to me to suddenly take that away. Something's wrong. My satisfaction with the stay ending cemented as soon as I saw the control ending of the vanilla game. What does it mean for Ren to choose the control of humanity over the spirit of rebellion? I feel like the stay ending showed control better than the control ending. And it's entirely because of Ren's willful negligence and outright rejection of Akechi and Sumire's wishes in favor of his own. Again, puts a pit of dread in my stomach. Ugh. But that's why I like bad endings so much. Stay ending Ren is everything Akechi accused him of being. Self-righteous who thinks he can bend people to his will and believes he knows best. It's well-meaning, yes, but it's controlling. While Stay isn't meant to be a bad ending, its theme of happiness at the cost of freedom sure does feel like one. It's an ending I feel very conflicted about, and yet, to a point, the true ending also feels somewhat of a bad ending in some respects. Ren has to go back to his hometown, somewhere where Morgana admits he'll have to start over again, as far as building a community and being accepted by his peers. All of the Phantom Thieves go their separate ways. It's a good feeling to have, being so conflicted over it. I really appreciate the theme of loss and acceptance and how it isn't tied up neatly. Sumire has made great strides, but she is still actively grieving a very close family member. Ren didn't get everything he wanted. Maruki had to cut his losses and go cold turkey and move on with his life. He didn't even stay with psychology. I actually really like that he became a taxi driver. As random as it was, he couldn't live like that anymore. Rip the band-aid off and try something new. I do think Akechi is alive, by the way. I mean, Ryuji's fake-out death in Shido's palace seems so obviously to show that the Persona users don't retain the same critical condition from the metaverse into reality. And I'm coping hard because he is my favorite. But I think the catharsis of him learning how to cope, accept humanity's good sides, and forgive himself would be a much more fitting end than death. Even if you totally hate the guy, quoting on, there's fates worse than death. I don't know what the future of Persona 5 holds. Maybe there will be a spin-off game or a manga about Akechi. And maybe another Strikers game. Maybe he'll cameo in the next Persona game. Maybe they'll confirm he's alive or not later. But as of Royal, his role in the narrative is over. And on a satisfying note this time. Coming to terms with Akechi's departure is where the game clicked into place for me. From a societal level, I understand Ren's role. He's the wild card. He's the one who rebels against the social contract. From a personal level, I think Akechi becomes Ren's roomie, his wakaba, his kasumi. But we never got to know them. We only know them through the lens of the people who grieve them. We did know Akechi. We got to see Akechi's various shades, what made him happy, his past, his flaws, and his personal and professional life. We got to see Ren value someone's presence in his life. be unable to let them go and learn to have to move on from that. Which is why I love the send-offs of Marky and Samaria at the end of the game. They're passing the torch. I mean, yes, Marky's treasure was a torch, but Ren is exactly where Marky and Samaria were. He's suffered a great loss and is at a crossroads in his life, but they all had to let someone they love go. Ren needs to explicitly understand he can't hold on to Akechi and continue going. This is why Stay versus Return hinges on Ren's ability to let Akechi go. This is why I feel like Royal hammers home the theme of control and the lack thereof from the original so well. It turns an abstract concept into a tangible, personal process we see Ren go through. It adds a lot to Ren's character. And I don't want to overestimate Akechi's importance. It's crucial, but it's not the only factor. Ren not only has to cope with the loss of a very close friend, but also the community and family he's built over the past year. The thieves aren't just ceasing their crime career, they're all growing apart. But that's just how life is. The first villain of the game is a man who cannot let his glory days go. If we remain stagnant, chained to the past, life won't have a chance to get even better. It's bittersweet, but I do love this ending. I can't really speak to how much the Phantoms changed society by killing the God of Control. But as far as their own personal narratives, I think the game really stuck the landing. Everyone feels like they're going to move onward, trying their best to be their best. Do the Phantom Thieves fix society? And I don't really think that was the point. At least not to me. Do the Phantom Thieves care about upholding the restricting lifestyle expected of them and feel chained to an expectation that prevents them from being free? No, and that's what I love. It's less about Control's defeat and what it meant to fight against Control, to reject stagnation. While I think vanilla Persona 5 is a great if flawed game, it is undoubtedly eclipsed by Royal. When I finished the vanilla game, I understood that I was playing a critically panned, gorgeous game that revitalized worldwide appreciation towards turn-based combat. When I finished Royal, I finished a game that deeply touched my heart. While there's many scenes in the vanilla game that feel mean-spirited and even sometimes, completely unnecessary, Royal absolutely adds the heart back to it. It never self-sabotages, it doesn't drag on. I don't have any critiques on the pacing or how they handled anyone's arc. It takes the best from the original, delivers a heart-wrenching and powerful finale. Persona 5 is a game about thieves in the night, stealing corrupt desires of criminals and making them repent. It's a game where you play a high school student with a double life juggling various tasks, acquaintances, and social cred to maximize your stats. It's a game where your team walks into a trap they did not know existed and has to deftly navigate out of it with every trick in the book. It's a game where you kill God and give the Prime Minister a lobotomy. It is also a game about what it means to live and what it means to die, how to cope with every day and the loss of that routine, to love and grieve, to move forward despite it all. And I'm very happy I experienced it. And that's a wrap on that. Let's do a very short outro. I spent a lot of time on this one, but I believe I put almost all of my current thoughts on Persona 5 here. Obviously, I can change my mind about any of these things later, but I feel pretty confident about this. Hopefully, my brain rot goes away now. Currently, I have no plans on playing other Persona games. These games are super long. I'll probably play Reload eventually, but I have no interest in Golden. My friend spoiled the entire plot 15 years ago, and nothing else about the game interests me. I am, however, playing the original Shin Megami Tensei 5, since the Shin Megami Tensei elements were one of the highlights of this game for me, so I'm having a blast with that. Definitely getting Vengeance whenever I'm done. I know it doesn't make sense to play the original, because Vengeance is just a straight-up better version, but I didn't have money when Vengeance dropped, and I already own Shin Megami Tensei 5, so... I'll make that follow-up on visual designs in the same vein as my recent Genshin video, but that might be it as far as Persona content, at least for now. The mood might strike me whenever. If you're interested in general design videos or reviews, I'd love it if you stuck around. The subscribe button is right there. My socials are listed as well, especially if you actually finish the video. I'd really appreciate a like. And thank you so much for your time. That really means a lot. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.